Hello, this is Angie Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical. Today's conversation is with Kyra Pauls. Kyra is a tarot reader, social worker, and therapist with training in Jungian archetypes and shadow retrieval. She's also trained as a yoga teacher and massage therapist, and Kyra is a practicing witch and druid. Kyra and I have known each other for 5 or 6 years and have sat in circle together and worked together many times. She's one of my favorite people to talk to about tarot because she blends tarot with social justice, psychology, and her earth-based spirituality. Kyra is a person I reach out to when I'm struggling with a reading or a card in a weird position or an ethical issue because she holds a high level of ethics and integrity and always grounds her work in compassionate, trauma-informed ways, something that I strive to do as well. Because of our shared dedication to social justice and intersectional feminism, we often find ourselves going down conversational rabbit holes about political repercussions in our spiritual work, about language itself. And so you'll hear some of that in this conversation. I love this conversation. You may want to have a deck of tarot cards with you so you can look at the cards we're talking about at times. I asked Kyra to sit down with me because I've been struggling with how tarot fits into this time of upheaval. My basic starting question was this: is tarot silly? Is it too silly for what our country is now going through? You can find Kyra online at awintarot.com. So that's AWENTAROT.com. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Kyra Pauls as much as I did. So before we start getting into our meaty conversation about tarot, maybe you can give me a little background because you're a tarot reader and you're a therapist and a social worker. So maybe talk a little bit about tarot and your practice and all that.
Yeah, definitely. So I have an independent tarot practice, and through my practice, I do like archetypal analysis from a Jungian standpoint, and I use the tarot as part of that process. And I also just do tarot readings individually as well. And with my clients, I do shadow work, and we just try to piece back together some of their lost parts that they might have. And I, full-time, I actually am a supervisor at my county's local rape crisis center. And so I provide counseling and therapy services to clients through that. I would say probably about half of my caseload are incarcerated individuals. And then the other half, we're a nonprofit, so we tend to be like the option that's available to people who are low income or who have other barriers to getting mental health care. And so like when I was at the domestic violence shelter that I used to work at, I had started using tarot cards with my clients, and I use them now as well with some of my clients. Of course, it's up to what the client's open to. Not all of my clients are necessarily aware of this side of me, but the ones who I really could gauge an interest in it, I've used it with them, and it's been really helpful in a multitude of ways in working with them.
That's amazing. I can imagine, like, if you weren't using them, you'd be thinking quite often, or that's a tower moment, or
exactly,
like, I wonder what card would come up right now. Like,
exactly. I do that all the time. And it's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a therapist too, and she's a social worker, and she's taking my tarot class right now. And she was like, wow, I just had this weird thing happen where I was sitting with a client and I thought of one of the cards as the client was talking. It just came to me. And I was like, yeah, that absolutely happens. Like sometimes we'll get like, we're so connected to the cards that we'll get like an image in our head of the card that's happening for them, or even a card that might be good advice for them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do that in regular life too, where you're just kind of, it'll pop in your head and you're like, oh, I'm not going to say that I'm seeing a tarot card. I'm just going to tell them what I know about that card.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is interesting. I mean, what's interesting about the whole tarot community, it runs the gamut of
Yes.
experience, like very professional people,
Yes.
and then people who just pick up the cards and actually don't even read them. They just the
Intuitive.
yeah, and
Yeah,
there it's like a portal is open when they pick up the cards. They don't.
absolutely.
I used to go to see this woman who she had tarot cards and she pulled them every time, but she didn't know what they meant. She just
Right?
every
Yeah,
time.
I've been to some of those. Yeah, and it's pretty amazing,
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
It's interesting to do the Jungian archetypes like in your work because Jung talked about the tarot,
Hmm.
but they came before him, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Do you know more about that than I do?
Yeah, and I don't know if I know more, but I know a little something.
I know a little
So I
bit, but not
mean,
much.
um, it's funny because Jung definitely did talk about the tarot. I think that some tarot readers who have a Jungian focus have maybe exaggerated how much he talked about it because he really only talked about it in like one or two lectures.
Yeah.
But what he said was actually really profound. Like, because he had said that the tarot has the ability to mirror back to us what our subconscious wants us to know. So that was his approach, really. And that's kind of the approach that I have with it too.
Yeah.
I
Me too.
believe that it reflects back the subconscious. And I think most tarot readers believe that, whether we know how to put it into those terms or not.
Yeah. And I think that's where I kind of struggle with being a tarot reader sometimes. And we've talked about this a few times, but I remember the tarot reader Mary Beth Bonfiglio had this
Mhm.
post about tarot and stuff. And I forget what exactly it was about, but I remember it sparked in me this feeling of like, yeah, I really struggle with it because there's this whole fortune teller aspect of it, which I do not subscribe to. And the taking advantage of people when they're in low places, grief stricken, things like that, versus, using it to mirror the subconscious and have conversations. So, one of the things I do when I read tarot is a card comes up, say it's the Empress. I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly what that means for that person. But what I say is, this is the mother, is something around this situation. How is your mother? How's it either reflecting your mother or reminding you of your mother, or how's your mother involved? And that might sound like fishing to someone if I was trying to pretend like I was reading fortunes that you're not supposed to guess, but we're having like a conversation and they're just like jumping off points for me to ask questions that I wouldn't normally ask when we're talking about work. Wouldn't ask somebody about their mother. We're talking about how hard their boss is. But then when you start talking, it's like, yeah, this person's really controlling. And yeah, you're right. It's really like my mother. I'd never thought about that before. It's happened so frequently. But anyway,
Absolutely. Well, I think that's it's interesting that you say that because I think like when I was first starting to do readings for people professionally, which was like 8 or 9 years ago. And I was really, really young too. I was only like 21. So it's like I was kind of easily, I guess, influenced or whatever, and wasn't super confident in myself, not just because of my reading abilities, but also because I was just very young. And I felt a lot of pressure to like put on this show. Like, oh wow, I'm gonna wow them with how much I know about their life. When really that's not the point. The reality is I think it works more like what you said. Like we still wow clients all the time, but it's in a
mhm.
different way because it's like, why are you bringing up my mom when I asked about my job? Well, because there's a connection. And as we get further into the session, usually the client realizes like, oh wow.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the part that I try to explain before I go in. It's like, I'm not reading your fortune. We're having a conversation and I'm just directing the conversation.
Right.
The cards are kind of like I always say we've invited spirit in, which sounds pretty woo woo, but just like we're having a conversation and
Yes.
spirit sitting at the table, or your higher self or your subconscious, however you want to talk about it. But I
Yeah.
mean, I struggle with being out sometimes, like being out as a tarot reader, being out as a woo-woo person, being out as a healer because of some of the bad names out there. And I walked down the street in Philly when I was about 26, and this woman stopped me. I was in pretty low state, and she said, "Can I do a tarot reading for you?" And I said, "Of course." That would be awesome, because I had just gotten this job. It was like my first corporate job, and it was like I felt like I was wearing a suit and playing pretend every day.
Oh, yeah.
And she took me to her house, did my reading, and then said, "There's a curse on you, and if you pay me $200, I will remove the curse," which is um,
Yikes.
one of those things that happens a lot to people, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, I did not even have $200 to pay her because I was quite poor. So I spent the next 6 months thinking I was cursed, and everything that happened. So 2 weeks later, 9/11 happened. And then
God.
my boyfriend crashed my car. And then, like, just so much stuff happened. And it was just legitimizing this
So it's
seed that
gonna
had been
fuck with
planted.
your head.
Yeah. Because I'm
Oh
like,
my
do I go back to her and get the curse removed? And then I realized,
right.
like, any time in your life that someone says you're cursed, you can prove it. Anytime someone says that you're doing, like, you're blessed and you have good fortune, you could also prove that. So it's
Right.
like,
Of course. Of
I
course.
don't know. So anyway, I really reckoned with this, and there have been times when I've even pulled back from tarot reading because I've had one of those clients. It's like, "Can you tell me if my boyfriend's cheating on me? Can you tell me if this is happening? And what's he going to look like? And what do I do?" And then I end up doing it. I end up pulling cards to figure it out. And
Yeah.
I'm like, what am I doing?
Well,
I don't
and
know. I'm
yeah,
curious what your
and
thoughts are.
I think that there's a way that like fortune telling can be done in an ethical way. Like I don't know that like I don't personally have that skill set. I have taken a couple classes in fortune telling, and so I know a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the unfortunate history that's associated with fortune tellers has created challenges for tarot readers as a whole, whether we're doing more holistic readings or if we're doing more like fortune telling, because there are these people that are just constantly looking to swindle. And I've noticed that now, like it used to be you know uh, like I think of that song Love Potion Number 9 and
Yeah.
like stuff like that. It used to be like buy this potion, and now what it is you're seeing like do this chakra rebalancing with me for $300 or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's like, that's when you really know it's like that there's something fishy going on. But it's tough because it's like, you and I both, we offer other services besides
Yeah.
just tarot reading that we might recommend to a client. So um, it definitely can feel difficult to come to terms with some of that and to figure out how we can be ethical practitioners when all of this is going on.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, I always give my clients the tools to do their own healing, because I really feel weird about recommending, because I think that everyone would benefit from having a crystal healing shamanic session. Absolutely.
Of course. We
But
believe in the work we do.
yeah, I believe in the work I do, but I don't like saying that. Often they'll say, "Do you do that work?" I said, "Yes, but try it at home for yourself first, and then if you need that extra boost, I'll be there to help you." But do you think of tarot readers as healers?
That's a good question. I think that some are.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, like we know that there are always going to be unethical people out there. It's kind of like are all like therapist healers, and it's like we know that there's a lot of therapists out there that do way more harm than good.
Right.
And we also know that there are a lot of therapists who do amazing work and they transform lives. And it's like that's kind of how I see it with the tarot. And I do think that because the tarot by its nature has the ability to be a therapeutic tool, I think that it can definitely be healing if it's used right.
Yes.
I think that if we're constantly, reading for the client over and over and over again, who wants to know if this guy likes her or not, we're not doing any kind of healing service if we just continue to keep reading for that same situation over and over and over again and saving the client's money. But we can do healing work if we start to examine deeper, like, okay, what is it about this situation and this guy that is making you want him to like you so much?
Yeah.
What is going on here? Like, in that way, definitely it can be healing and transformative.
Yeah. Do you have any rules about that?
That's tough. I mean, I wouldn't say I have any hardline rules.
Yeah.
Because there's times that sometimes, like, you have a client and they really do want to know, and it's just kind of a sweet situation, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, let's do that because
Yeah.
it's interesting. But
And I love doing that.
I know it's
It's
fun.
fun. But then when it's can I see you next week? Can I see you the week after that? Like I try to limit to once a month, one moon cycle, or once, if it's the new moon and the full moon, I can understand that, but it gets a lot, and there's no change. I mean, I often find there's nothing growing there.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah,
that
I mean, definitely. Because, like, I think that with my clients, like, I wouldn't want anyone booking, like you said, more than once a month. Like, once a moon cycle, I think can be doable, but even that sometimes can be excessive, especially if we're reading on the same thing over and over and over again. Because that's kind of the rut that I think clients can get into, is they come to a reader because they want information on a situation, and they just keep coming back for more and more and more and more and more information, but they're not taking any actual steps.
Yeah.
And I know that there's some tarot readers, like, within, like, the Tarot Professionals Association. I remember there was one years ago, and he had said that whenever he does a tarot reading with someone, he gives concrete action steps for them to take, and he wants to know how those action steps are going before they book another reading again.
Wow.
Yeah, and, like, on one hand, I kind of like it. On the other hand, for me, I think that it's maybe a little bit more strict than I would like to get, a little bit
Yeah.
too paternalistic than I want to get, because at the same time, like, it's their choice if they want to get a reading. But I do definitely try to help clients with action steps more so than just giving them, like, information, like, okay, so what can we do about this, or, like, who can you call in to help you with this, or whatever it might
Yeah.
be. Yeah.
Yeah. There are a couple readers in our area who only read once a year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I find that kind of excessive. And yet I completely understand why.
Yeah,
And it's a different
absolutely.
kind of reading than what you and I do. One of the things, when I get to read for people every, month or something like that, there are things they do and there are things they don't do.
Right.
And the things they don't do are also important.
Mm-hmm.
When they're asking me the same thing, I'm like, I've had to hear the same message 3, 4, 5 times before I take action. It's not
Yeah,
because I'm not doing
of
my
course.
work. It's because it's hard to wrap our brains around.
Right. And if the client's in, like, a Eight of Swords kind of
Yes.
state, like, I mean, are you really expecting them to take those action steps? I mean, that's the thing. Like, I had worked at a domestic violence agency, and it's less relevant now, but there's still sometimes some of that. But when I was working with domestic violence clients only, I mean, it would be cruel in a way to tell them, no, 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 you don't get to have my support until you show me that you've made some changes.
Yeah.
And it's, that's not how I like to operate, because I think that part of the healing work of tarot and being a tarot reader is just the fact that we hold space for what people are bringing to us, whatever that is. And so I don't love to deny that to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, bringing non-judgment to the table is sometimes the work. It's just being able to be vulnerable and tell somebody, I still haven't changed.
Right.
And I'm still accepting you, even though you haven't changed. And,
Exactly.
how many times do people come into your office as a therapist
Hmm.
and push those buttons, like
Of
test you?
course. Of
How are you
course.
gonna, are you gonna still love me if I do this, this, and this? And, we fall into that role. I mean, part of our issue, I think, is we don't have a governing body
Hmm.
that, so there is the whole wide range of people. But I think you and I kind of talked about it a little bit, but, a lot of people that come to see me, the church has failed them.
Yep.
Therapy has failed them.
Yep.
Their families have failed them.
Yep.
They don't have um, any kind of advisor in their life. They don't have someone who can mentor them and give them compassion and love. And that's my role, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I've definitely encountered that a lot too. That a lot of our clients are people that the mental health system has completely failed.
Yeah. All that being said, they're usually pretty smart and canny, and they understand that
Absolutely.
they are looking for something else.
Yeah, they know the ways that they've been failed.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it just, I think that's part of when I kind of talked about struggling with the legitimacy of being a tarot reader, I struggle with this idea that because those people have been let down, I'm somehow exploiting them, which is not my role. My role is to help them heal from
Right.
that and help
Right.
them find their way forward. Um, because a lot of the bullshit in the metaphysical community, the woo-woo community, or whatever you want to say, is this whole spiritual bypassing thing.
Hmm.
So, some people come in and what they want to do is just skip over the hard work. Just like, okay, I'm just going to light this candle, do this prayer, focus on my vision board, and everything's going to be fine. Like everything's going to be okay. It's like, no, you actually have to deal with the stuff that you're running away from. So what do you think? Let's talk about spiritual bypassing.
Hmm.
Maybe just, we can talk about it on a big scale, but also with tarot, that's super easy to do too.
Yeah. And it's funny because I actually had a student in my class ask me that before, like how can you make sure, like, when you're using the tarot cards, that you're not just spiritual bypassing all of your issues?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's kind of tough to answer, but what I said to her was read the cards.
Yeah.
Because I think that, and this isn't to poo-poo anyone who uses the cards more as a psychic tool,
Yeah.
like people who don't read the cards but they use them intuitively. I have no problem with people like that. Like me personally, I think it's really important to understand the numerology and the astrology and the meanings behind the rider waite and all that. I think that it adds to my practice. But that being said, I've had some kick-ass readings from people who didn't know what the cards meant. So this isn't to poo-poo them, but I do think that when we get away from looking at what the card is actually saying, that is when we get into trouble with spiritual bypassing sometimes. You can't, like, if you pull the 10 of swords, you pulled the 10 of swords. You can't, like, stick a rose in it and call it a vase. Like, it's the
Yeah.
10 of swords.
What is that old joke? At least it's not raining in the Ten of Swords,
Right.
It's like,
At least it's not raining, right?
it's still pretty freaking dark up.
Right. Yeah. And I know for a long time, there was that thing with the death card, which I don't know if you remember, but like so many decks were making the death card like a fucking butterfly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like it's a butterfly. It's transformation. And it's like, no, it's death.
Yeah.
Like the transformation is what is to come, but it's fucking death right now. Okay. Um,
I remember us talking about that too, where like, no, you actually have to,
you
you
have to
know,
die first.
yeah, because they do. Like a lot of people, and I mean, I think I'm guilty of this because I talk
Oh,
about
I'm
it.
totally guilty.
Because I always am like, oh, don't freak out. No one's gonna die here. But
Maybe.
yeah, but there is an aspect that has to die, and that's not easy. And like when we
Right.
tell people that that's an easy process, then when it becomes hard, they think they're doing life wrong, you know?
Right. Oh my gosh, that's a great point. Exactly. They think that they're doing it wrong, that I'm broken because I'm having such a hard time with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that, you know, when people have gotten away from what the actual card means, that's when they've had trouble. And that's personally for me why I like to know like the root meanings that, you know, like Pamela Coleman Smith had planned when she was painting the cards and everything. I like to know what was intended,
Mhm.
to make sure that I'm checking myself with
Yeah.
that. But yeah, I think that, you know, if we read the cards, we can avoid the bypassing, as long as we're reading the cards.
Yeah. And every card has a light and a dark.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, even the most positive cards
Hmm.
has a light and a dark. And
Oh yeah, I love talking about that.
yeah. Oh, let's talk about it. I love it.
Well,
Because
yeah,
people are
so
always like, well, what's the shadow of the sun? I was like, well, it doesn't acknowledge that there's shadow. Like it literally does
right.
not acknowledge the shadow.
Yeah, and when you think about the sun like in real life, I mean, I'm as pale as they come. The sun burns me
Yeah.
and the sun blinds you.
Mm-hmm.
Um yeah, it's funny because there are a couple positive cards that no matter how many times I get them, like I always just get this feeling. And one of them is the Six of Pentacles,
Yeah.
because we were talking about this in our tarot class. The thing about the Six of Pentacles is, okay, you have this guy here, he's balancing his scales, everything's equal. He's handing his coins down to these lowly people.
He's such an asshole.
He's such a fucking pompous
He
dick.
totally is. Wearing red when you're giving to the homeless?
No, he's like, look at me in my robes. It's like it's totally performative activism right
Yeah.
there. And it's also
Yes.
and it's also like, the thing that I compared it to was, I think I saw a thing where Kim Kardashian, when COVID first broke out, she was making face masks and she was going to donate a portion
Oh,
to, to charity. And these were like fucking like $50 face masks.
and multimillionaires too.
Right, exactly. It's like, my God. Like that's what that card's shadow is for me, is
Yeah.
like he's standing above them and he thinks he's better than them. And yeah, he likes to show it.
Yeah.
And the Nine of Cups is another one too, because
Yeah.
he's sitting there all smug.
Yeah.
He got what he wanted. I had given an example where I was reading for another reader who was really making me doubt my abilities, and she wanted to know about this guy that she liked, and I was pulling these cards and I was getting like the Tower, the Ten of Swords, the Seven of Swords, like back to back to back. And she's like, no, 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 other psychics have told me we were meant to be together, that we're going to like save the world and everything. And so then finally, when she continued to make me keep pulling cards,
Yeah.
I finally got the Nine of Cups, and I was like, fine, you get it. And she like literally sat back and looked like him with her arms crossed. Like, yeah, that's the answer I wanted.
Well, see, that's exactly the Nine of Cups for me. That whole story is exactly the Nine of Cups, where it's like, you can get anything you want. You got it.
Anything you
You
want.
want to manifest it? Sure, you got this guy. Yes,
Mhm.
there's towers and Ten of Swords around him, and if you want him, you got him. That's exactly
Exactly.
what you're getting.
Exactly. That's
So
what you get. You get your pile of shit.
yeah. Like, here are all the warnings. You can get it if you want to.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. See, I love talking about this stuff. This is when you get into the nitty-gritty of the tarot. The one that I always not struggle with, but the Four of Wands, because
Mm-hmm.
Waite never wanted you to read that reversed.
Right.
It was the same meaning up and down.
Yes.
So, I mean, I always see it as like a ritual, like there is a rite of passage happening, like you're moving from one state to another, like graduation, like you're a high school student, you're leaving,
Yeah.
or
Next
you're
level.
retiring, or you're going from a single person to a married person, or you're having a baby and you're having a shower, there's some kind of like rite of passage.
Yes.
But I struggle with the shadow of that because he didn't want there to be a shadow of it. So, when I'm getting it and it's a challenge for people, I'm always like, you need to do a ritual. You need to honor that you're changing. So I
Yeah.
always see it as like a lack of ceremony around an important change of some
Absolutely. Yeah, because I think there, like you kind of picked up on the shadow of it then is if we think about the shadow just as what's hidden, it might be that, yeah, this really important momentous event like isn't in their conscious awareness.
Yeah.
And so somehow they need to do something about that and honor it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the light aspect of some of the dark cards can be hard for me.
Yeah. I like the light aspects of the Seven of Swords and the Five of Swords.
Mm-hmm.
I like those ones.
Yeah. I love
Because
the 5.
yeah.
That's one of
And
those that tells a whole story.
it does. It tells you the story of both like the people walking away and
Yep.
the dude who has all the swords.
Yeah. Did
And
you
like
see those? Did you see that one that I just bought this deck, and it's like somebody's like written little thought bubbles in them,
oh yeah,
and
yeah.
the 5 of Swords is just like the people walking away have a thought bubble. Like, don't be a dick, Gary. So it's like every time I see that card now, I'm just like, don't be a dick, Gary.
Yeah.
Like, it's so evocative, that card.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like I've had times with that one and the Seven of Swords where I've had a client who, maybe, and I've gotten it for me too, especially like in the past, because I definitely used to be like this, like someone who's very conflict avoidant, who's very, very passive, who's very, very much a people pleaser. And then I'll get like the Five of Swords or the Seven of Swords for them, and I see it in a totally different way. I see it in its light aspect where it's like, okay, the Seven of Swords, like, you need to think about yourself right now.
Mm-hmm.
You need to make this about you, and you need to get what you need and go. You need to strategize, and you need to be cunning. And then even with the Five of Swords, it can be like, yeah, you need to make sure that you get across what you need known, and don't worry about those other people and how they're going to take it. Just say what you need to say, stand up for yourself. And yeah, you can see with that even how we could get into spiritual bypassing, but you have to be kind of aware of who the client you're working with is.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I mean, there absolutely are some people who desperately need to have a little bit of Seven of Swords, strategizing and cunning.
Yeah. And the way I always see that, he's gone into a camp and stolen swords. So he's the enemy of the people who are in the camp, but he's not the enemy of his people.
Right. Yes.
He's successful.
Exactly.
Yeah. I never know what to make of his fez.
I know, like, what is that?
That has to be a historical reference that I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It must be some conflict, because she used to like kind of ground things in a place.
Yeah, I wonder, because I remember before, I mean, I don't know a ton about fez symbolism. I know before I had been told that it had something to do with circumcision.
What?
Yeah, I don't know. Don't ask me.
I mean, there's a lot of swords to cut the dick.
There's a lot of swords to snip it.
Yeah, exactly. Huh.
Yeah, I have no idea.
That's one of those interpretations that it's like the last line of a book. It's like, and sometimes this is about circumcision.
And sometimes.
Ah, that's cool. I mean, it's so interesting what people have to say. I guess I see it, with him wearing a foreigner's outfit, like he is
Oh,
not of us, he is the other, he's the stranger.
that totally makes sense. Yeah, because he's from the other team or
Yeah.
whatever.
Which one I find so interesting is the Six of Cups with the two children, because like
Yeah.
nothing is right on that card.
Yeah.
Like the children look like old people, but they're little. The cup
Right.
is like more than half her size.
Now I have to like look at
Yes, look at it. Look at it. I should go get my deck.
Oh
But
my God.
she's wearing mittens and there's spring flowers.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, she's wearing mittens.
Yeah. And he's
Oh, and his hood is weird. I mean,
yeah.
I like it, but it's like an elf hood.
Yeah. Yeah, he looks very elfin.
Yeah. Oh, see, I love this card, but you're right. It's weird.
It's weird, and the reason I think it's weird is because it's about nostalgia in the past and
Yes.
childhood, and like how exaggerated everything is. Like the cup is
Oh, that's
much
true.
bigger.
That's a good point. That's a good point. That yeah, it's from that childlike view.
So why do you love that card? I'm interested to hear that.
So I love it because just anytime I personally have gotten it in my life or I've pulled it for a client, it's usually been just a really sweet situation. And that's actually one that I have a hard time. Well, no, I wouldn't say that. No, I can definitely find the shadow in that. But usually when I get it, it's like, oh, this is like a sweet reunion of some kind. I had it recently come up repeatedly with a situation with a friend where we had some distance and everything, and now she and I are coming back together closer again. And so I had gotten that card a lot, and it kind of, to me, symbolized sort of the apology that she was giving me, and we were coming back together again. So I love it because it can like be about a reconciliation, but just in a really just sweet, genuine kind of way. But there definitely is that too, where if it comes up with other cards, I'm like, oh no.
I know.
Oh no, he's coming back.
I'm such a cynical bitch. I'm like, this is all about like you're exaggerating, like nostalgia isn't what it used to be, that.
Well, that's a great interpretation of it. I love that. I love it.
It's it's interesting when you get into the nitty-gritty of it, because it is really situational, like, and it also depends on who I'm reading for, not just what I'm reading for.
Yeah.
So
and the other cards around it and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Because there are people that I don't give as hard of a line to as someone I've been reading for years and years.
Right.
One of the best things that happened to me was early when I started wanting to read more professionally. And I had read for myself for like 20 years, and then just like, okay, I think I'm being called to do this, and people were asking me, and my friends, she and I would read for each other. I would read for her like once a week. I mean, it was really too much. And she felt, I think she was going through so many transitions, like going through, life stuff. And to watch the way the cards changed and moved was like the most informative part of, if you can have that experience. That's why I always tell my students to read for themselves all the time, because if they're reading for themselves, then they can see how the cards actually play out in life. And then the cards change meaning for them. But doing it for her and seeing, we always joke because the devil was in the past. No, it was in the outcome. Then it was in the approaching. Then it was in the present, then it was under everything, then it was over everything. I mean, it literally was in like every reading we did together.
Oh my God, that damn devil.
When it finally got to the past, it was such a relief, and she could feel it, she could feel that energy being leaving her, which was really cool. So I hope she doesn't, I don't think she'll mind me saying, talking about that, but it was an incredible experience to do that. And she would always be like, I feel like I'm imposing on you. I'm like, you're not imposing, because this is so good for me to learn how to read the cards this way and to see how they're playing out and how they change. And
absolutely.
but I wouldn't recommend that for clients.
Yeah.
It's great for your bestie. When we talk about this work, like, what do you think of, is tarot serious? Is it, because part of the reason I want to have this conversation was everything that's going on in the world. So there's the George Floyd was killed by police, and there have been protests, and I contacted you because I was trying to do the June tarot reading, and I was like, does this sound silly?
Right.
And so that's part of why I really wanted to have this conversation, because you said, no, it's important. And so I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I think that I think that it's really easy for us to see everything that's going on in the world and to feel like we're not doing the right things, or we're never doing enough. And maybe in some ways we're not. Maybe we never can do enough. Maybe that's just the reality that we're all faced with. But we continue to try, and yet, I mean, first of all, with the tarot still being important, number one is that everyday life is continuing for every single one of us, regardless of what's happening in the world. And I see that in particular with like my clients who I work with who are incarcerated, or who are very low income and have these other struggles. It's not that they don't care about what's going on in the world as much as their focus is on the day-to-day and the here and now. And so I think that if we think about that, though, even for those of us who are more privileged, it's just that whole concept that we have to keep our own cups filled so that we can continue to do the good work, and we can continue to be activists, and we can continue to speak up and advocate. But I also think that the tarot can be used for that. In your reading that you did, I think it was important because it gave tools to people who are doing activist work. And when I say activist work, I don't necessarily mean that that's like their full-time job or anything. I just mean people who care and who are trying to, at the very least, raise awareness. And you were giving tools that help keep people grounded and help keep people focused on a bigger goal, I guess is what it is. And I think that that's what we really need right now. And the other thing too is that even just on the day-to-day level, I mean, tarot is very helpful for us with keeping us in check. And I think that right now, actually, if we want to talk about like using tarot to kind of do some activism work, we can think about using it to examine ourselves. I'll speak for me in particular, white people especially. When I say we, I mean us white folk. The tarot can be a really important tool for self-examination in times like this. And actually, I don't find it to be silly in any way. It can actually be incredibly illuminating, sometimes even in a horrifying way, to see what is actually lurking in our shadows that have been carried through for generations upon generations. And for people of color, I think that the tarot can be extremely validating to what they're going through right now. The tarot is an amazing validator. And actually, I just thought of this because I had a client send me a message the other day. She's in my class, and she had said that the tarot has been such a helpful tool. She's not sure if she's, really feeling called to read for others or not. But she's realized that it's a really important tool for her personally, because as she put it, it anchors her and it reassures her that she's not crazy and she's not making things up. And I think that that's really important for a lot of us right now. I think that, for white people, we have a very long and dark history of gaslighting others and also gaslighting ourselves. White people as a whole have this huge wound around avoidance, avoidance of emotions, and it's a product of the colonialism that we have put others through, and that we've also put ourselves through by default. We're masters at gaslighting, and so tarot calls out the gaslighting. So if you're a white person, it's going to call out your gaslighting and the ways that you've been gaslighted, and if you're a person of color, it's going to validate to you that yes, you have been gaslighted.
Yeah, those are great points. I mean, that's the part that a lot of people, I think, stay away from tarot because it is honest, it is darker, it isn't like the oracle cards, which is like everything's going to be awesome. It does kind of call out shadow, and it calls out the shit that you're dealing with. It tells you what's going on. So I love that point. That's really good, because I struggle with whether spiritual work selfish. Is this kind of spiritual work selfish? And that's maybe like that shitty programming we have as mothers, that when we take any time for ourselves, it's not positive. So I mean, I don't really struggle with tarot in that way anymore, but I have in the past.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do. I mean, I know for me, even, I felt like, should I keep posting about tarot? Is this even relevant right now?
I know, exactly. Like, that's the part of spiritual bypassing too. Like, I don't want to talk about tarot when there's actual things I should be talking, like people are dying. But on the other hand, there is so much to learn, and there is personal work. Like, the personal is political, and when we do our work, we get to see how to change, and when we change, other people change, and it's that domino effect.
Definitely.
So it is important.
And when we think about like tarot, like kind of in a Jungian way, like if the tarot contains universal archetypes that we all can identify with, then the tarot is always relevant because it's always universal. So, it's like right now, what's going on in our country, we might really want to look at, like, one thing is, if our country's birth date is July 4th, 1776, then that means that right now the United States is in a devil year.
Oh,
and so it's like, it's interesting to consider that, which, unfortunately, sorry to everyone who's been saying that this is a tower year. It is not. Next year's the tower year.
Yeah.
Yippee.
That's so interesting.
But, it's like we can think about things like that.
Yeah, because if you count it based on, the Julian calendar, it's an emperor year, which is a year that we're dealing with authority.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, yeah.
And the Me Too movement was birthed out of a justice year.
Yeah.
Which is interesting too.
Exactly. Like, I mean, and it's interesting to think about that. Like, I mean, globally, we're on this emperor year. And in the United States, we're specifically in the devil year, thinking about the devil and the emperor impacting us, and how that makes what's going on very, very clear, because we're dealing with issues of power and the history of power in this country and what it's looked like, and are we going to break those chains? So yeah, I mean, when we're talking about stuff like that, like the tarot will always be relevant.
Yeah.
Always.
I love it. I love it because it's hard, well, we live in central Pennsylvania and, we can't go out. Like, I can't stand in the PTA line and talk about, I can't talk about it. It's so nice to talk to another tarot reader that speaks this language and who speaks it so eloquently and also like brings the political in, because I do think it can be a tool for
Yes.
use in that. So do you do your own readings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How often
Yeah.
do you read for yourself?
I probably pull cards. Honestly, I probably do it once a day at least. Just because I have various situations that come up. But like for me, like if I was gonna do like a big like reading for myself, it's usually with the full moon
Mm-hmm.
that I'll do like a bigger reading for myself. But yeah, I do like small little readings here and there, or if something big is coming up, I'll do that whenever.
Yeah.
But I do actually kind of like I do that, but I prefer to go to other readers, you or someone, for some things, just because, I think that it is easy, even with having the concrete images that are the tarot, it's still easy to get really caught up in the spiritual bypassing and seeing what you want to see, or even not so much seeing what you want to see, but making assumptions, right? Because it's like, it's my life, I think I know what it's talking about, but it wasn't talking about that at all.
Yeah. I so many times when I'm doing my own readings, I'll try to validate. Like I'll just say, is this really about what I think it's about? And it'll be like, nope. I have to figure out what the hell this is about.
Yeah.
Or something comes up and I'm like, okay, who is this? Like, I think I know who it is. And then when I pull, it's like not that person. And I'm like, oh shit, now I've got to figure this out.
Yeah.
And it's always right.
It's always right.
And I agree. I mean, I avoided going to other readers for a while because I was struggling with some of the ways the messages were being delivered. I don't know if it was because I'm a reader or a woman of color, or I don't know. I have no idea, but just having some things said that were just so not appropriate.
Yes. Well, and I think that's some trouble we run into sometimes. It's like, I mean, you and I both have backgrounds. I mean, it comes from different places, but we both are educated on this topic.
Yeah.
And related topics, right? Yeah. And you and I both have been trained in things that could be considered trauma informed.
Exactly what I was going to. I mean, the trauma part is a huge part of what I'm often reading for. Like, how do we heal that trauma? How do we accept it? How do we own it? What do we need to do for it? Like there's so many times I get some of those swords and I'm like, okay, it's time for a cord cutting. Is there one in particular? No, but every once in a while it'll just jump out and it'll be the 3 or it'll be the 9. And I'm just like, okay, it's time to cut the cord, and doing some of that more shamanic work or transformative work with it. But yeah, I mean, trauma informed, I think, is the perfect phrase for it.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of readers out there who aren't, because again, there's no governing body or anything, which there's pros and cons to that.
Right.
I'm not necessarily saying I'm pro having a governing body, but I'm just saying the reality of not having one is that literally anyone can do it with no training whatsoever. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. And some people, I mean, that's the thing. There's a tarot reader for every person, I think.
Definitely.
Like even the people who aren't trauma informed, they will find other people who don't want to look at their trauma. So that's okay.
Exactly.
I mean, they're a perfect fit. But
yeah, and I think that there were a lot of tarot readers for a time that were, and psychics just in general, who were really lacking in that area, and there still are.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can see why that could leave a bad taste in one's mouth.
Yeah, I mean,
what you're looking for.
Yeah, because I kind of rise up against that The Secret and all the law of attraction
Oh my
stuff.
God, yes.
I just, even some of the language is something that's so ingrained. Like I, for a long
Mhm.
time, always, and I still do, it's like a bad habit of saying like, um, we're just going to pray for everything to be for your highest good. And then I was in Oregon with my teacher and the other students, and one of the women said, "Oh God, that's such a bullshit phrase." And I was like, "What's a bullshit phrase?" And she's like, "For your highest good," because that tends to mean some kind of puritanical bullshit good that
Mhm.
you can never get to. And I was like, "Oh, she put me in my place, but I needed to be put in that place." I mean, I still struggle like not fully understanding the depth of some of that language that's in my in my psyche, and why it's not going to work for everyone. But it's just part of our community and
Yeah.
struggle
Oh,
with
it
it.
absolutely is. That sort of stuff has unfortunately stuck around pretty heavily.
How have you made sense of being a tarot reader when there are people who are working without ethics or without when there's exploitation from other tarot readers, or there's a legacy
Yeah.
there of not being trained to be trauma informed or to be mindful of those things.
Um, I mean, honestly, that's kind of a tough thing to contend with. I mean, for for me, as far as like the actual ethics of doing the reading itself and how I handle all of that, um, I keep everything focused on being trauma informed, non judgmental, culturally competent, and keep everything focused on what's going to be in the best interest of the client.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that in some ways, as much as I hate to admit it, the New Age community did do a bit of a favor for us tarot readers in that they really did kind of normalize some metaphysical things, which kind of opened the door for tarot to be accepted again. So I feel like in some ways I got really lucky with my timing.
Yeah. Oh,
um,
absolutely.
like I totally got lucky. So there is that working in my favor. But with my spiritual practice in general, like because I am talking to clients about like spiritual topics, I intentionally avoid personally, I intentionally avoid using anything that would be appropriative for me to use, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So like while I love the things that other people do that might involve Native American spirituality or East Indian sort of things, I personally, I try to stick to what is authentic to my ancestry.
Mhm.
Stick to, the Celtic mythology and stick to, I mean, even Greek and Roman. I feel like that's kind of if anyone wants to participate, like you kind of can to some extent
Yeah.
because they were
Yeah.
so, I mean, it's so much of that is involved in our culture right
Mhm.
now, and always has been. But yeah, I think that I kind of keep it focused on what's going to be the least culturally appropriative
Mhm.
for me to do,
Yeah.
while also raising awareness that there are these other things. So like I have clients who will ask about like fortune telling, or who will ask about hoodoo or voodoo or root work or something like
Yeah.
that. And so I have a list available of people I can send them to, like who are shamans or who are hoodoo workers, who are, ethical practitioners, rooted in their own culture, kind
Yeah.
of. But yeah, I mean, it's like it's tough to figure out how to really get across that you're one of the ethical ones. I mean, for me, I really I keep things focused on the practical and the here and now.
Yeah.
Um, I think that we can get into trouble when we're making these big, huge predictions, because it's kind of like crack in that like people get addicted to it. They're like, oh my gosh, there's this big prediction and I want more big predictions about how amazing my life is going to be 5 years from now. And by the time 5 years comes around, that psychic will be no more. They'll have moved to a different state, or they won't be doing readings anymore. And we don't ever get to confirm whether their prediction came true or not, right?
Yeah.
Um,
That's very true.
Yes, that happens. So yeah, keeping it grounded on the here and now, I think, is another good way to stay ethical.
Yeah. On my website, I've posted the ethics from the ATA, from the American Tarot Association.
Oh, yeah.
Just to like say, okay, here I follow some ethics. Here are my ethics.
That's awesome.
Yeah, just, and they basically say, I'm not going to diagnose, prescribe, and they do some of the things that, seem like no-brainers.
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah.
Because I have those too in a social worky way.
Yeah, exactly. That's like the closest we get. They're great though. I mean, they keep us informed as tarot readers, but and then like I try to call it a spiritual counseling session instead of a tarot reading, just to be able to kind of get around that. But
I think
instead of like psychic predictive reading.
Because I kind of try to like make my Instagram and my Facebook and website and everything a little bit more like, hey, I'm like a social worker, but I do also do readings and stuff. Like that's part of my service. It's not the only thing I do.
Yeah. Well, I've had such an awesome time talking to you.
Yeah, it's been fun.
We have to do more of these tarot talks.
Yes, we will.
Thanks, Kyra.
Yeah, thanks, Angie.
Thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows, you can send them to Angie@themoonandstone.com.